Hi, welcome to the Reboot Loading Podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Reboot Loading Podcast. I am here today with Joe Dubois, who is a software engineer and a musician. I am super interested in learning about how you got into both of those things, as well as just your journey and where you are now. I know you're originally from the DC area and now you're living in LA. So welcome, and tell us all about it.
Sure, I would love to. Thanks for having me on. The relevant parts of my story start around high school. I grew up in Virginia. I grew up in the DC area, went to a magnet high school, a science and technology high school. So that was kind of a push in that direction from almost childhood. And then I also started playing music probably when I was about 11 years old. So both of those things kind of entered my life, around that time and became an important part of my life in high school. And then while I was in high school, I played in a band with some friends and we played around the DC scene, and that was really a lot of fun. That's kind of where I learned how to be a musician, how to play music with other people. I was the bass player of the band, which is still my primary instrument. Yeah, I'm still very close with those guys, the band, and they're still some of my closest musical collaborators, which is really, really awesome. But graduated high school and then went to University of Virginia for college, where I decided for some reason that I was going to study physics. I was going to get my degree in physics. I think the reason that I landed there was astronomy had always been kind of my first love. I loved astronomy and cosmology and the big picture thinking and the universe and the galaxies and all that stuff. And I kind of got to college and was like, oh, there aren't really astronomers anymore. Like astronomer is not really like a job. So physics was the next closest thing. I batted astrophysics around for a while because that's kind of where you go, if you're interested in that stuff. And I basically learned about halfway through college that I was not cut out to be a physicist. I didn't want to be an academic. I didn't want to get a PhD. I didn't want to be in school for another 10 years. Not my thing. I got into physics because of this intellectual curiosity, because these questions that I had, and I discovered that they were not answering the questions that I was interested in. They were asking a set of questions that I found a little bit less interesting. So straight off from physics, I was like, all right, I need a backup plan, and that's how I landed on software engineering. Pretty transferable skill set. I'm a problem solver, and I can probably talk a company into letting me be a software engineer, even though I don't have any experience, and even though my major is in physics, because I'm coming out of a good school. I have, a strong science degree, so it's like I'll find somewhere that will let me work for them, basically, and that's what happened. And I was fortunate enough to get a job at a school as a junior engineer at a medium-sized startup, and that's where I learned to be a software engineer, and have been one since. That was in 2016 that I graduated. Yeah, and then about a year or so after I graduated, because I fell out of playing music in college. I just had other things to do, mostly drinking. And a year or so after I graduated, a friend of mine, I was living in DC, was like, yo, we need a bass player. I'm trying to form a band. I was like, okay, come back. I'll play some music, and rediscovered my love for it. Got into playing around the DC area, which I did for a few years in a variety of bands and projects. And, I played for different artists and had a really great time. I had my own band, with other people, with some of my best friends from high school who I had mentioned. That was awesome. And then after a few years of living in the DC area and being a musician there, I was ready for an upgrade, so to speak, because I love DC, actually. It's a great city, but there's not a whole lot of music industry there. So it's the scene there tends to be more of a hobbyist scene. And I just wanted something a little more serious. I was ready for a step up. I debated between a few different cities and ended up moving to LA essentially on a whim. I had some friends who were moving here. I had never even been to LA before I moved here, and they were like, "You should move with us." It was a couple of musician buddies that I had in DC. They said, "We're moving to LA. We're going to try to do the music thing," and I said, "All right, let's go." And that was beginning of January 2020, 2 months before COVID happened. So we moved to LA. We're all like, music, yeah, we're gonna be musicians. Music scene is gonna be awesome. And the first 2 months were awesome. It was so much fun. And then, of course, COVID happened, and there was no entertainment anything for about a year and a half in LA. And yeah, so that was interesting. But luckily, we're through that now. Yeah, I'm loving it. I'm loving being a musician. Gotten some really interesting experience in the music industry, in and around it, kind of getting to see how it works mechanically from a few different vantage points, right? I said, like, I'm a bass player, I'm an artist, and then there's a million other roles within the music industry that people are. Some things I didn't even know about before I moved here. So it's been really cool to learn about just generally. And so I maintain, my software engineering career. I work fully remotely and play around the music scene here in LA, and I'm working on my own career in that respect too.
You're living the dream.
I really am. I like actually am. I'm like I wake up and I give thanks for that because I do sincerely feel that way.
I love it. I love that for you. I love that you're able to still go into, the engineering side, you pique your interest in all the little brainy things, and then you can go and be creative and then apply a lot of that same things to the music side. What are some of your favorite things that you found throughout this whole process of like going out, learning more about the music scene and all of those things? What are some of the favorite things you like? Do you like managing the aspect of like a band, or do you like more just being creative and playing?
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a great question. I thought when I moved to LA, I thought I wanted to be a professional bass player. I thought that was like what I had my eyes set on, and I basically learned over the last few years that what I really love the most is actually being in the artist chair, and that's because I love writing. I'm a creative, I love to generate the thing, but it just requires a particular skill set. It requires essentially a lot of self discipline because if you're an artist, there's nobody holding you accountable except yourself. Nobody cares whether you finish your piece part. Nobody's going to push you to do it. You have to do that on your own. And I'm good at that. I like doing that. I enjoy the autonomy. You're also usually like if you're in the studio, I'll go into the studio, I'll bring a band in, I'll record my music. You're the boss, essentially, if you're the artist. You are directing. You're making it happen, but you're also putting the team together. You're thinking about who do I want to be in this room? Who do I want to be in this band? How are they going to work together? And that's something that I feel that I do pretty well also is that sort of organizational management, I guess. And there's a lot of that as an artist because you are constantly directing small teams of people essentially to do various things. So I just felt like the artist skill set suited what I wanted to do and what I enjoy. And so that's kind of where I'm at right now and what I'm focusing on.
Did you ever think about studying anything in music or maybe doing a minor in something in music, or was it just all more the science?
Yeah, it kind of wasn't on my radar in college, to be honest with you. And I think a lot of that probably came from my parents who were relentless through my childhood about being like, you need to find a job that's going to make money. You need to make money. You're going to find a job that's going to like, you can't be an artist. You can't be a musician. That's like, you're not going to make any money. That was kind of my priority in college. And then it's kind of interesting because I feel like moving away from home also was a big part of why I felt comfortable enough to start being an artist, to move into being an artist, getting out of from under the watchful eye of my parents, for lack of a better phrase. And I love them, and we're very close. But it's like, there's an element of, especially as a beginning artist, which I was into my mid 20s. You're not very good at it at the
Mhm.
beginning. You're not, and then like that's okay. That's like part of being any kind of artist. You have to be bad at it to begin with. And that's really embarrassing to be bad at something and to go up on stage and play your stupid little songs and they're like not really that good. I needed to, I think, kind of get away from everybody that I knew, really, to be able to do that and kind of work through that to get to the point where I'm actually good, which is where I feel like I am now.
A lot of growing pains.
Oh yeah, a lot of growing pains. I mean, I'm sure you noticed it too with the podcast, right? Like your first few, probably not nearly as good,
Yeah,
like as it goes on, you get better. It's just the
yeah.
repetition of doing it. And it's the same, I think with any art, with any creative endeavor, it is what it is. But my parents aren't the most understanding about that. It wasn't a good environment for me necessarily to develop that.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that it's good, me being a parent, we have the best of intentions, but at the same time, I think the newer generations are a little bit more aware of I don't want to say like the helicoptering part. We're a little bit more aware that we've got to allow our kids to explore and figure out really who they are because you don't want to. I know everybody has this dream of their kids becoming a doctor or whatever it is, right? And if they're just not good at it, why are we trying to push them in that direction? Really,
Yeah.
let's try to hone in on what they truly have this innate gift for and expand on that because you can turn it into really any. Being a creative, I see so many more people out there really embracing that side of themselves. to where, it's always like, okay, I have to have this job to or this career path to pay the bills, and there's nothing else that you can do. But that's not the case. And
Right.
it's exciting to see that you've been able to break out of that. And I know that was not easy, as far as you're moving to a place you've never lived before, brand new to everything. Like, how was that and I know COVID played a part in there too, but like after all was said and done, how was it making a name for yourself and for like your bandmates and just getting
Yeah,
out there
it's
and getting to know people?
oh yeah, it's hard. It was hard. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. It was move to LA. Funnily enough, so I moved to LA with these friends who invited me to move with them. I moved with them because I didn't want to move to a strange city alone because I knew that it would be hard to build a network from the ground up, especially in a place like LA where I don't have any roots. I didn't know hardly anybody here. So I moved with these friends and then COVID happened and they left LA. They moved out of LA by the end of 2020.
Oh, wow.
All three of the people that I moved here with. So I was alone. I ended up in the exact situation that I didn't want to end up with. Not only that, but even worse than I could have ever imagined because it was a pandemic where I couldn't even go out and start to develop a social network. You know what I mean? So sticking it out in LA through the winter of 2020 into 2021 was the hardest time of my life. I've never felt so alone. I've never felt so isolated. On the other side, sitting here now, I'm like, I'm so grateful that I did it. Been the most formative experience of my life, I think it's fair to say. And it's the thing that I'm proudest of doing, but it was not easy in any way.
Yeah, I can imagine. And how do your parents feel now, like just seeing you on the other side, so to speak? Maybe not
Yeah,
all the way on the other side yet, but getting
right. They're obviously happy that I'm through, COVID and that I have friends and I have, a network out here now. They're less happy that I'm living in LA at all. They live outside of DC and they miss me and we're close, and they want me to move home. And I totally understand that. I don't begrudge them at all for that. But yeah, I think that about sums up where they're at. Every time I see them, it's when are you moving home? When are you moving back?
yeah.
I do plan on moving back. I'm not like leaving them high and dry, and they've always known that. That's always been the plan. So they don't love that I'm in LA. In short, they don't like that I'm all the way across the country.
Yeah, that's hard. And especially,
It is.
COVID time was tough for about every aspect. And now you're in this new place and, like you said, like your friends had moved away toward the end of 2020. I mean, that's a lot. So to see where you are now, I would say that's pretty good. I'm
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 grateful.
I'm excited for you. I'm excited to see
Thank
what
you.
where this is going to go, where it's going to take you, especially balancing both careers and
Right.
doing both things. Because, I mean, having one and a singular concentration on something is hard enough, but you're like, I'm too good for one. I'm going to do two.
Something like
So
that.
how do you balance it out? Like, how do you balance being able to do both of them?
So that's actually something also that I like about the artist path versus the instrumentalist path. You have a lot more flexibility and a lot more autonomy as an artist to kind of do things in your way, on your schedule. You can fit it into your life the way that you want to fit it. Whereas if I wanted to be a professional bass player, you're always on somebody else's schedule. You're always traveling. You're working nights and weekends. It's just a different lifestyle, and it revolves around somebody else's thing
Yeah.
or a bunch of other people's things, which I was just like, that's not, it would have been really, really hard to balance that and a career in engineering. I
Hmm.
think you do, if you want to be an instrumentalist, that is all my friends I have in LA who are instrumentalists, like that's how they make their money. That's what they do. That is what they do every day, all day. You know what I mean? They don't have the flexibility for two careers. So the artist thing fits nicely into it. But I think a big secret is that I work remotely. I work from home, right? And then I have like all my music stuff at my house. So I'm can do both of my jobs from my place of residence, which allows so much flexibility. I can just hop from one to the other at any point. I can do my engineering thing for a few hours. I can hop over and do music for a half hour. I can hop back.
I mean, it's all about balance, and also it's about if you truly enjoy both things, you're gonna make it work, right?
Right.
Most of us are
It
out here.
doesn't feel like work. I have my daily schedule that I set up. I do my music
Yeah,
stuff at a certain time. I do my engineering stuff at a certain time, and I love my little routine. And it's like, it's
yeah.
great.
I mean, if you love it, then it doesn't, like you said, doesn't feel like work. So what is your favorite thing about engineering, and what is your favorite thing about being a musician? Like if you could pick just one thing for each.
Engineering, I love the problem solving. I love being able to build something and having something at the end of it that you can be like, I made this. And I love the creativity because software engineering is a more creative variety of engineering than basically any other field. So it's super creative, which I love. About being an artist, I love that there are no rules. That I can do whatever I want, whenever I want. Like I can present however I want, I can write whatever I want, and nobody can tell me that I'm doing it wrong
Mhm.
because there is no wrong way to do it. It's just however you do it. That's your artistry, you know. So that's definitely my favorite thing about being an artist is just being able to paint, so to speak, with a brush in a way that nobody can tell me
Mm-hmm.
anything about, you know, otherwise.
Yeah. And
Whereas like with software engineering, there are like there's wrong ways to do things. You know, it is very creative, but like there are
yeah.
people will be like, yeah, no, you can't do that.
No, that's it's all about that creative side for the musician piece. You're able to harness it and put it out there in whatever way you see fit. And that's also ties into like a lot of entrepreneurs, right? So when you're doing your entrepreneur thing, you're doing it your way. And you're going to find your tribe of people that's going to enjoy the way that you do something. They'll want to work with you or want to watch you, want to. I know you said early on about getting on stage and not being as great. So, were you ever booed, or did you ever get, like, I don't know, tomatoes thrown at you or whatever?
No, that is rare in my experience, like an actual hostile audience.
Yeah.
But you can tell when people are feeling it, you
Mm.
know, and when they're not. And my most recent debacle was a few months ago. I was just playing a house show, and I was playing an original song, and I just forgot all the words. It was a new song. It was like my song. I totally forgot all the words. So I was like, I just kept going, and I was just mouthing and like saying syllables. Like I was not saying words. I was just saying random syllables to kind of like to the melody to just kind of like keep it moving, assuming that like people wouldn't understand. Like they would just think, "Oh, I can't understand what he's saying." You know what I mean? They don't know. It's an original song. They don't know I forgot the words.
Mhm.
So that was a fun thing that just like you have to deal with. But I've been on stage so many times at this point that you kind of reach a point where whatever happens is going to be fine. You know, we'll figure it out. And because everything has happened, you know, in
Yeah.
my past. So that's a nice thing about performing. At some point you do reach a level of comfort of, yeah, I can handle anything that comes up just because I know I've done it. I've done it in the past. So
What are some of your favorite shows or memories of shows that you've done that just really stick out for you?
the first thing that springs to mind is a show I played back in DC some years ago. That was one of my we had a number of good shows with that band, my main band in DC. And it was like a venue that we really loved to go see people play. You know, small, maybe 200 capacity. And we were playing there on like a Friday night or something, Saturday night, and you know, it was packed in, sold out, and we were just like great energy, great crowd, so much fun. That's one that jumps to my mind. But we had a number of shows like that in DC. I love those like 100 to 200 people packed in, like hot and sweaty, little gross, kind of grimy, and I'm just like, you know, giving it my all, and the band's going crazy. Like that's my favorite type of show to play.
When you said about like, the smaller venues and like people really getting into it, I like that too, like smaller concert type things where live music is playing and everybody's just really vibing to whatever is going on. Like I can see from the flip side as the artist being like, yes, you're feeding off that energy from everyone. With these two careers that you've got juggling right now, are there certain skills and certain things that you use in both that you can kind of flip back and forth?
Totally, absolutely. In somewhat unexpected ways too. I was talking to a friend of mine about this who's also a software engineer and musician, and we'd both been interviewing this year for new jobs, engineering jobs, and I realized at some point a couple months into the interview process that the interviews are more performance than they care more about your performance than they care about your problem solving a lot of the time. I discovered that if I enter that same mindset when I'm going into an interview as I do before I go on stage, it's like very helpful because it is a performance. And if you are stumped, and you know, software engineering interviews, They're like tests. They're so annoying. They give you these coding problems and they make you solve them live. It's stressful. But if you're stumped, if you don't know what the hell's going on, literally just put on a smile and like be cool. You know what I mean? And they're not gonna know. And it's the same thing as when you're performing to an audience. Like just put on a smile. Like as long as you are vibing, even if every single member of the band is fucking up constantly, the audience is gonna have no idea. And it's the same with interviewing. And in some degree, it's the same with like working. Like when we enter the professional workplace, there is a little bit of a performance aspect to it. So that's one parallel that I've noticed. I've also noticed a funny parallel between CEOs and artists. Is like very similar people, very similar personality types. And that's kind of helpful if you think about it that way when I'm dealing with artists in the music world and when I'm dealing with CEOs. And I spent my whole career at startups. So I'm used to dealing with the CEO more than, maybe if I had spent my whole career at larger companies. You kind of learn different skills. And then also, like I was alluding to earlier, organizational management. I've learned a lot about how to manage a team as an artist that I'm sure will transfer to my engineering whenever I'm ready to make that jump into management, which I don't want to do yet. But it's the same thing, you're managing a group of a few people. I've noticed a lot of transferable lessons actually.
I can see that, especially with the interviewing piece, right? I've not been, I've not done software engineering, but I've heard the stories about being put on the spot and then like having to solve issues and problems right there. Sometimes they make you take it home and like do a bunch of
Yeah.
things. I can see though throughout the multiple interviews that I have done, way more than multiple, but the many
Yeah.
interviews that I've done where you do have to, it's almost automatic though. You have to put on this show. It's a different persona,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
That you take on. So I'm sure like you probably have like a different stage persona versus your work
Exactly.
persona versus your personal life. There are a lot of similarities between those. And I can see that. I can definitely see that. How do you equate the CEOs and the artists? I'm not seeing that part because I guess I don't.
I think what I'm getting at with that one is you have to be a little bit crazy to do both. You have to have a vision of something far off that probably 99% of people you tell are not going to believe in
Mhm,
you. They're not going to see it. They're not going to understand a lot of the time.
mhm,
Um, so there's an element of these people are very driven. They're focused on a particular outcome. They are kind of in their own world a lot of the time, honestly, head in the clouds a bit. And the company exists essentially to bring the CEO's vision into reality. The team around the artists exists to bring the artist's vision into reality. So in both situations, you kind of have somebody who's at the center of the web that is the driver, that's the visionary. So those are kind of like where I'm coming from. And I just like in interacting with both types of people, like I've noticed a lot of it's just the same personality type. You know what I mean? It's just that something happened early in their life that happened to send them down one path instead of the other. They're just very similar, I think, in a lot of
Yeah,
ways.
no, I see that now, especially from the aspect of if you have like this wildly crazy idea, and like you said, the company is built around the CEO's idea of let's make it happen. And being a musician, you might just be like, you know what, we're gonna play a show like this now. Like, a lot of the back in like the was it the 90s or early 2000s, like kind of more like grunge rock kind of
Mm-hmm.
Slipknot-ish.
Yeah.
I don't even know if that's grunge rock. I think it's
No,
some
that's more like new metal.
new metal, yeah. Where, they're like, let's just wear costumes out,
Yeah.
and like let's just do this thing. Or like back in the 80s, I'm thinking of like bands like Twisted Sister who just really pushed the envelope and
And you saw that with people like David Bowie, like Prince, even more recently like Lady Gaga
yeah.
in the late 2010s. She kind of broke out by doing all this crazy wacky stuff that people were kind of like, you're
Mhm.
just crazy, but she knew exactly what she was doing. She's very smart about it, and like it propelled her into superstardom.
Yeah, and yeah, so I can see that. I like that analogy though. I like that you could equate the two and with
Yeah,
those similarities.
it's been really interesting actually, just like being able to see that. Like,
Mhm.
oh, huh.
That's something that I would have never connected the dots there. What about your favorite artists or influences? Like where does that come from?
a lot of it comes from my parents, just what we grew up listening to. I think we get a lot of our music taste from just what we happen to grow up around.
Yeah.
So my parents are baby boomers, so they raised me on classic rock, all that stuff from the 60s and 70s. So that's was a huge part of my influences growing up. And my brother was really big into soul music and southern rock. So that also became a big part of what I love. I personally have always gravitated towards like pop music. I love pop music. I love women pop artists in particular. I think they do very interesting things. So that tends to make its way into my music as well. And I've always been, I would say, a writer. I'm good at writing words, so my music tends to be sort of lyric oriented.
Mhm.
Lyrics are at the forefront.
Do you usually come up with the lyrics first and then the music after? Or do you have like a melody in mind and then you kind of play off of that?
I when I first started writing songs about 5 to 8 years ago, it was all lyrics first and then music because I wasn't really good enough at the music to do it all together. But as I've gotten better at the music and just better at songwriting, nowadays most of my songs come together. I'm usually working on the lyrics, the harmony, and the melody all at the same time. So I'll start with something, one of those. I'll either have a lyric or a melody bit or a couple chords, and I'll start with one of those, and then you just start playing them all together and just kind of vibing on it, letting it happen. John Mayer calls it Ouija boarding. You start messing with melodies and syllables essentially as you're playing. So you might come up with some words that don't make a whole lot of sense, but you're just trying to get a sense of the how it feels, how it sounds, the
Mhm.
syllables, how they sing, because that's honestly more important than the words, especially when you're making pop music. That's kind of my process now. I kind of do it all together. I'll sit down at either my piano or a guitar and just vibe with it, repeat it, try different syllables, try different melodies until I start getting I'll usually end up with like a couple stanzas, like some words, and then I'm like, all right, now what is this about? What is the song actually about? And then I kind of rearrange it, fill in the blanks, and kind of make it a cohesive thing. But for a while, it's just kind of like vomit, word vomit. You just stream of consciousness. So yeah,
If you're just kind of throwing things out there that's in your head and then you have to figure out a way to make it make sense in a song and then finding the right sound to go with it and all of that, it sounds fun to me. I don't know. Maybe I'm
it
just
is. It's a blast. I absolutely love it. And it's become more fun as I've gotten better at it, to be honest with you. A few years ago it was hard. It's really hard because I was like, I would always have to start with the lyrics and then it would just take me so long to figure out the music because I just wasn't good at it. But as I've gotten better at it and I'm able to write songs quicker and put things together quicker, it's so fun.
Have you met any musicians that were inspirational for you?
Yeah. So a big part of the reason I moved to LA was to be in this sort of milieu of the top musicians
Mhm.
in the country and really kind of the world in many ways. So there is no shortage of inspirational musicians in LA. And I've seen people who I find tremendously inspiring, like who are famous, like Kamasi Washington and Thundercat and John Mayer and people like that. And then I've also met people who are just musicians who play around, who are not famous. They're instrumentalists, but they are so good. It's almost scary. It's like, and it's inspiring. It's people who it's almost like music is their first language and
Mhm.
English is their second language. And when they are really in it and when they're really flowing, they're communicating in a way that they are not really able to with
Mhm.
their words. It's very interesting. So there's a lot of people, and I've been fortunate enough to play with them, become friends with them, and even have them record with me on my stuff, people like this. And it's like so amazing, just so inspiring to be in the room with them, to watch them work, to listen to them work, but also to be able to play with them and learn from them is the reason I moved to LA.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's so much like untapped potential in so many people. And
That's the craziest part. The best musicians in the world are not famous. They are just playing gigs in LA. Like it's insane. Or they're not playing gigs in LA. Like one of the best musicians that I've ever met and played with was one of my roommates who lived in this house with me a couple years back. And he is the only person I think I've ever played with who I would call a virtuoso.
as crazy as it sounds, like I love going and seeing like my kids' recitals that they do for their
Hmm.
music because I'm seeing like these young kids with this potential that you could probably see them on a big stage one day or wherever. And so,
You and me both. Yeah, I love live music. I
mhm.
just love it basically any time, any context. I enjoy it so much. And people, I think, enjoy the live music. What major labels are doing these days, a lot of them is sending new artists out with basically two musicians, and a lot of the music is like on tracks nowadays. So with new artists, you'll have like maybe a drummer and like a guitar player on stage with you, and like the rest of it is being played through a track, and then you're singing along to it essentially. And that's to keep labor costs down. That's why the labels do that. But people love seeing full bands. People love seeing musicians playing with each other. Like that is, they love it so much more than seeing the tracks. At least from what I've seen, the audience experiences that I've had in LA, it's just more exciting. It's just more fun. There's more to watch. There's more going on, and it's so cool to see that musical conversation and hear that musical conversation. So I'm right there with you.
Last year I got to see Stevie Nicks in
Mm,
concert. She has her
very
full
cool.
band out, backup vocals and everything. And that was really cool to see because I hadn't seen that in a long time as far as like this full on, actual all musicians on the stage.
Right.
So that was really cool. And then another one, I got to see Boy George last
Nice.
year. And, he had his whole band out there. And those were two that really stuck out to me. I kind of miss the days where artists would go and introduce their bassist or introduce their drummer
Mhm.
and those sort of things because you don't really see that anymore.
Yeah, no, it's rare. It's
Yeah.
rare. Oh yeah, and from the artist perspective, it's like I think the vast majority of artists would prefer to have that band, and to have that full ensemble. It just is so expensive. The labor is your biggest cost as the artist or as the label. Whoever's paying for what's getting done. Labor is your biggest cost. That goes for recording. That goes for playing live. I'm fortunate because I have the resources, thanks to being a software engineer, to bring a whole band in when I'm recording, and I can go to a real studio. I can have a real drummer. I can have a guitar player. I can have all that stuff. A real engineer. Most artists my level cannot. They don't have those resources. They're recording in their bedroom with maybe one microphone. So it's just it's a shame. You
Mhm.
know.
I know I said that you were living the dream, but if you had, if you could pick anything with money not being a factor, what would you be doing right now?
That's a crazy thing. That's why I feel so lucky. Like I'm doing two things that I really love. I have an incredible house. I live in a great neighborhood. You know what I mean? Like I live in a beautiful city. I have the resources to travel. I like shit, man. I mean, realistically, if money were not an object, I've looked into I love the environment. I love nature, and I would really love to be involved in conservation work,
Mm-hmm.
in particular like ecology, and I've looked into that. So that is maybe something that I would maybe trade out my software engineering career for like an ecology career or something, something that's more conservation oriented.
And I know you said you like spending time in nature, so you've been to how many national parks?
Right now we're at, I think 23 out of 63. Should
Wow.
be getting 24 here in a month or so. And then there's still a couple in California that I need to hit before I leave. But the real big one is going to be Alaska. There's like 10 or something in Alaska that I'm like, I don't even know if I'm gonna be able to get to all of them in Alaska. Some of them are pretty crazy. Like some of them you have to take like a friggin' plane and they like drop you off and then pick you up a few days later. And I'm like, I don't know if I could. I literally don't know if I could do that. I'm like, and there's a couple parks at the very top of Alaska where if you go to like the NPS website to get details about visiting, they're like, do not visit unless you are proficient in wilderness survival. Like, and I'm like, damn, okay, because I guess like the idea is you could get dropped off, and then the weather in Alaska is such that if it becomes bad, they may not be able to come pick you up for like a week or two. So
Right.
you kind of need to be able to like actually survive, So I'm like, maybe might not get to every national park, but we're gonna try to get to most of them.
Let's go with 50. Let's
Yeah, right. 50 would be good.
So outside of all these things that you do, what other hobbies do you have?
I have a number of hobbies. I love to read. I love to write. I love to hang out with my friends. I love gardening. I love fostering kittens, which I do.
What type of gardening? Like, do you have like a vegetable garden or is it more flowers?
I did at my last house up in the valley here. We had a big ass backyard with 6 raised beds and then like every fruit tree that you can imagine. We had the raised beds and none of us knew anything about gardening. This was during COVID, right when COVID hit. And I was like, okay. well, we have this garden. I might as well start gardening. So I grew a bunch of stuff in those raised beds, all sorts of tomato and pepper and spinach and lettuce and strawberries. Since I moved into my current house, the landlord has the front yard set up exactly how he likes it. We're not allowed to plant anything. So I'm stuck to containers now. So I do everything in pots, herbs and tomatoes and peppers and just like my house plants and stuff.
Nice. One of the last questions I had for you was, do you have any other musicians in your family, or is it just you? Or
Creativity runs in my family, and there's a few musicians kind of in distant relatives, but also my dad was a hobbyist guitar player, the whole time I was growing up. And my brother went to school, my younger brother went to school for music, got his degree as a great guitar player. So it's definitely it was around, which is kind of how I got into it, I think.
well, Joe, I really appreciate you coming on here, telling me your story, sharing with us how you went from getting your degree in physics to software engineering to musician. It's been just an absolute pleasure to speak with you about all these things and getting to get a little peek into your life and your creative process. So I really appreciate you coming on. I will have all of your contact information in the show notes. So if anyone wants to go and follow you, highly recommend it. I see you doing great things in the future. I'm really excited for you. And, I would love to have you back on if you ever want to come back and just chat.
Yeah, no, I would love to. Thank you so much for having me. This is so much fun. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I can't wait for next time.
Awesome.
If you're interested in becoming a guest on my show, all the information on how to contact me is available in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time.